Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into Job today, chapters 15 through 21. It's where Job's friends, well, they try to comfort him, but it doesn't go so well.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. Even with the best of intentions,
Hmm.
sometimes we can be like Job's friends. We give advice or try to explain things, and it makes sense to us. But for the person suffering, it just completely misses the mark.
Absolutely. When Eliphaz basically says to Job, hey, you've been arrogant and you've forgotten to pray, like piling on guilt on top of everything else Job's going through.
Right. And it's so interesting how Eliphaz shows that classic human response to suffering. We want to find a cause, a reason why. Like, if we can find fault, then it reassures us. Like, well, I wouldn't make those mistakes, so I'm safe.
Oh, wow, that's a good point. So it's not really about Job then. It's more about Eliphaz needing to believe that the world is fair and predictable.
Exactly. But Job's not buying it. In chapters 16 and 17, his response is raw, honest grief. He even calls them out. He says, "You're miserable comforters," which, let's be honest, he's not wrong.
Yeah, he's definitely not wrong. But what gets me is that even while he's in so much pain, Job shows the empathy that his friends lack. He says if things were reversed, he would actually comfort them.
It's like he's showing them what he needs.
Mm.
And then in chapter 17, he reaches out, but not to his friends, to a higher power. He says, "Lay down now, put me in a surety with thee. Who is he that will strike hands with me?" It's like his hope isn't in what people can do, but in something bigger.
Yeah, it's a big shift. It's like he's saying, nothing you're doing is working. My only option now is to lean into my faith.
It really makes you think, when we're in those really tough moments, where do we turn? Do we stick to those familiar explanations, or are we open to mystery, to the unknown?
So now Job's appealing to God. And then Bildad chimes in. What he says might be the most insensitive thing anyone says in the whole book. He basically says to Job, your legacy will be forgotten. I mean, come on, that's the last thing someone who's grieving needs to hear.
Oh, it's brutal. But Job's response, it's one we still talk about today. He says, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth."
That my Redeemer liveth line, it's more than him just saying he believes. It's almost like he's defying Bildad's prediction. Job's holding on to something bigger than his current situation.
And that declaration is something we see throughout history.
Right.
We see it from those facing persecution for their beliefs and from everyday people dealing with loss. The idea that we can be redeemed, that suffering isn't the end of the story, it's such a comfort.
It's amazing how that one line from Job speaks to this universal human need we all have for hope, for meaning, even when it feels like everything is falling apart.
Definitely. But Job's friends aren't done yet. Zophar comes in chapter 20, and he doesn't offer any new ideas at all. He just keeps saying suffering equals punishment. He even accuses Job of hiding his sin.
It's like they're determined to blame Job, to make his suffering fit into their worldview. It makes me think, are we ever guilty of doing that? Do we see someone struggling and automatically think, well, they must have messed up somehow?
That's a hard question, but it's an important one to ask. Are we really supporting others, or are we just trying to feel better by finding fault?
And then Job, in his answer, he throws a wrench into their whole argument. He says, hey, wicked people often live long and happy lives. How do you explain that? He's basically saying, if you're right, then explain why bad things happen to good people.
And that's when Job starts to get into this idea that theologians call theodicy. How can evil exist if God is good? He's saying, your simple answers don't make sense when I look around at the world.
That's why I really enjoy going deep like this. We're not just getting a basic summary of Job's struggles. We're really getting into the deeper questions that come from his story.
I agree. And in chapter 21, Job ends by rejecting their empty words. It's like he's saying, I know who I am, and your judgments don't define me.
It's a great example of self-worth and inner strength. Even when he's surrounded by negativity, he stays true to himself. I think that's a great lesson for all of us.
I think so too. And that's just the beginning of this story. In part 2, Job's frustration boils over, and he ends up having a face-to-face with God. You won't want to miss it.
So we're back with Job, and he's still dealing with those accusations from his friends. But now it's different, isn't it? It's not about him defending himself anymore. It's about him wanting answers.
Yeah, you can feel him getting tired. Those same old arguments, constantly hearing that his suffering is somehow deserved. In these next chapters, 22 through 27, Job's focus changes. He goes from his friends to talking directly to God.
Like he just can't take it anymore. He needs to know why platitudes aren't enough.
And this is where the poetic side of Job really comes out. In chapter 23, he says, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. He really wants to plead his case.
But it's interesting how, even with all this emotion, Job knows that God can be hard to find. He even says, "But he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold." It's almost like he knows that this is painful, but it's refining him somehow.
That's such a powerful image. Gold being purified in fire. Like
Yeah.
suffering can actually help us grow and understand ourselves and our faith better.
But that doesn't make it easy, does it? In chapter 24, Job even talks about the injustice he sees in the world, like bad people doing well while good people suffer. He's basically saying, if God is really fair, why is this happening?
He's facing that age-old question of theodicy. How can a good God exist when there's so much evil? It's something people have struggled with for centuries, and Job just puts it out there, raw and honestly.
And his friends, well, they're not helping. What they say gets shorter, like they're just going through the motions. Maybe even they're running out of answers.
Yeah, and with them fading into the background, Job's voice gets stronger. He's not buying their attempts to put his experience into some neat little theological box.
Yeah.
He's not giving up his integrity just to get an easy answer.
And then Bildad, in chapter 25, he talks about how powerful God is compared to us. It's almost like things are changing a bit now.
It does feel like a shift. Bildad's acknowledging that maybe we can't understand everything. He asks, how then can man be justified with God? Or how can he be clean that is born of a woman? Like he's realizing that maybe they haven't been approaching this the right way.
Which leads us to Job's last response in chapters 26 and 27. He describes how awesome God's power is over creation. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. You can hear the wonder and acceptance in his words.
And then he says something that always gives me chills. Till I die, I will not remove mine integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me so long as I live.
It's like he's declaring his self-worth and faith even after everything he's gone through. That's what makes Job such a timeless character. He doesn't have simple answers or pretend to understand it all. He doubts, he struggles, he's angry, but he never loses that belief in his own goodness and in a just God.
Such a strong message for us today. It's okay to question, to wrestle with your faith. It's okay to not have all the answers. What matters is that we keep searching, keep growing, and trust that even when things are hard, God's with us and he wants what's best for us.
And this leads us to the climax of the story. In part 3, we finally see that meeting between Job and God, and let me tell you, it's not what you'd expect. All right, we're back. The final act of the Job story, chapters 28 through 42. We've had all this buildup, all this back and forth, and now finally, God steps in.
Yeah, and you know it's really interesting. Chapter 28 is like this pause, this little poem before the main event. It's all about wisdom, and Job comes to this conclusion that real wisdom isn't something we figure out on our own. It's about fearing the Lord.
Like taking a breath before diving into the deep end, Job goes from wanting answers to realizing that we can't understand everything.
Right. And then, boom, chapter 38. God shows up, and it's not a calm conversation, it's a whirlwind. And God doesn't answer Job's questions. He asks a whole bunch of his own.
I always picture it like a courtroom. You know, Job's been waiting to present his case, and then God comes in and says, hold on, let me remind you who's in charge here.
It's a big moment. God describes how amazing creation is, how huge the universe is, all the details of nature. He asks Job, where were you when I created the earth? Tell me if you think you know so much. It makes you realize how small we are compared to God.
Like God saying, you think you've got it all figured out, Job. Think your suffering is so special and unfair. Take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
And it's not just for Job, it's for all of us. We tend to think we have all the answers, but this reminds us to be humble, to be in awe of God who's bigger than anything we can understand.
So what does Job do after that? How does he respond to God putting things in perspective like that?
Well, he changes completely. He goes from demanding justice to saying, I've been talking about things I didn't understand, things that are too amazing for me. It's a real moment of realizing I don't know it all. He sees that he was trying to make God fit into his limited understanding.
And he repents, doesn't he? But not for a specific sin, more like for thinking he could understand God.
Exactly. He says, I hate myself for what I've said, and I repent in dust and ashes. He's admitting that he's not all-knowing and surrendering to a power greater than himself.
And what about his friends? They were so convinced they had it all figured out. Are they okay?
Not even close. God turns to them and says, I'm angry with you and your two friends. You haven't spoken rightly about me, not like my servant Job has. Talk about a plot twist. Job, the one who is questioning and angry, he's the one who's right. And his friends, the ones with all the easy answers and judgments, they're the ones in trouble.
That's always been so surprising to me. It's like a lesson in what happens when we try to simplify things spiritually, offering cliches instead of real empathy. Sometimes faith means wrestling with doubt and even being angry.
Absolutely. And then God does something amazing. He gives Job back everything he lost. And then some. Double the possessions, a new family, a long life.
Like a fairy tale ending. But it's more than just getting stuff back, isn't it? It's about being restored, about experiencing joy and abundance after going through so much pain.
Yeah, it reminds us that even when we don't know why we suffer, even when life seems completely unfair, God is still there. He's working in our lives even when we can't see it.
So, after this incredible journey through Job, what do we take away from it all?
Well, for each of us, it reminds us that it's okay to question things, to wrestle with our faith. It's okay to not have every answer. What's important is that we keep searching, keep growing, and keep trusting that even when things are hard, God is with us and wants good things for us.
And it reminds us to be compassionate and understanding towards others, especially those who are hurting. Job's friends thought they were helping, but their words made things worse. We should try to be the kind of people who offer real support, not judgment or empty words.
Well said. And more than anything, I think Job's story gives us hope. It shows us that even in the darkest times, there's always a light coming, that we can be redeemed, we can heal, and even when we can't see it, God is working everything out for good.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Job. We hope you found it interesting, maybe even a little challenging. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the faith.